You don't own your deposits at the bank. They are not yours. What you own is an IOU from the bank. What this book shows is that everything on your brokerage platform, it's the same story. When you see that you've got so many shares of this stock and you believe that you own that, what you own are IOUs for shares of that stock from your brokerage house. All of the shares have been taken and then they've been transferred to one entity that's a clearinghouse, and it's all pooled. So your name is no longer on those shares. This is just pooled. And then it goes into an international clearinghouse. And you'll see with these quotes that the reason for a lot of this is to give them better insight into all of the collateral that they can then take and use in a crisis to keep from going under. If you want to survive what is coming, if he is right, you need to read this and see whether or not you think it's true and whether or not you need to take some action. Hi, this is a review and condensation, sort of a Cliff Notes, if you will, of a book called The Great Taking by David Webb. And this book is about how laws have been changed and the banking sector is basically ready. The brokerage houses, it's been legalized for them to basically be able to take everything from you in a crisis. And there is a crisis coming. To me, it feels like it's right around the corner. With me to help explain this book and how the banks and the brokerage houses are going to be able to take everything from you, your property, your retirement accounts, your real estate, your bank accounts, is Alan Hibbard. Alan, how are you doing?
Well, I'm great, Mike, aside from the topic of the book, but yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, tell them the little blurb that you came up with for this book, because it is about the end of property rights.
Yeah, exactly. So when we think of the Great Taking, people ask, well, what does that mean? The Great Taking of what? This is the end of property rights, which is arguably why governments exist, which is to protect property rights of people. And if property rights are over, there's absolute chaos, right? And the Great Taking means the Great Taking of all your money or currency, all your financial assets, and all your real property. And all the laws are currently in place to subvert property rights and legally take everything you own and move it into the hands of a very small number of people.
Yes. I believe that we're at this inflection point in the world right now, that there is a crisis coming at us. And I don't know if it's going to be, it feels like it's going to be 2024, like they're not going to be able to control this. If you remember, 2008 was also an election year, and they were trying to hold everything together, but they couldn't. Lehman Brothers happened while Bush was still president, before Obama became president. So it was an election year, and they lost control over this. Now they're going to be trying to hold this together again through this election year, but will they be able to? That is the big question. So the Great Taking is about how the entire derivatives complex, which is enormous, is collateralized. It's backed by all of your assets. And you can get a copy of this book for free by going to thegreattaking.com, and you just download it right here. Because this is about how derivatives are backed by your assets, and he's got a lot of evidence in this book. There's a lot of quotes that we're going to go through, some of them that are from communications between the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank. It's quotes from the Universal Commercial Code. It's quotes from laws and court cases. And so he's got a lot of evidence here for his claims. So it's mostly about derivatives. So Alan, could you define for the viewers what a derivative is?
Sure. So a derivative is called a derivative because its value is derived from something else. Okay, that sounds complicated. But let's say, Mike, I bet you what the weather is going to be. and we come up with a little contract. If it's sunny, I'll pay you $1. And if it's cloudy, you pay me $1. Well, the piece of paper itself isn't worth anything, but once the weather is revealed, it's either going to be worth $1 or nothing. So the value of the paper is derived from something else that happens, in this case, the weather. But in the financial markets, all these financial derivatives are based on the value of stocks and bonds and whether or not people pay their mortgages and a whole bunch of complicated things. But the very base of it, all the value comes from working people, whether or not they go to work, whether or not they pay taxes, whether or not they pay their mortgage and their other loans. That's a derivative.
Okay. So this visualization that it's from the Visual Capitalist was done back in 2022. And there's this square here, and each square represents $100 billion. And you can see this first one, Sam Bankman-Fried, is a very, very small square. So that's a fraction of a square. But in order for you to see the scale of derivatives, I've got to take this and minimize this as much as possible so that I can scroll through some of this. Let me put on my glasses here so I can see. Okay, so this is the amount of currency in the US, and that's China there. This is the gold that exists, and this is coins and bars. So this is the investable gold. This is all the billionaires in the world, and that's more than investable gold. So you can see actually how little gold there is. But then we go through central bank balance sheets, S&P 500. This is US and China GDP. The global currency supply. This is the stock markets. This is global debt. This is all of the real estate in the world. Then you've got global wealth. So all of the wealth in the world. And then you have derivatives here. And so this is the face value and notional value of the derivatives. But you look at the scale of that versus the stock market. So this is the stock markets were all of the securities. So this little area here, and then your deposits backing, and this is a scale where this exceeds all of the wealth. So the global wealth is much smaller than the derivatives complex. Have you got any comments on that before we get into the book?
Yeah, well, that already should be worrisome and a bit of a head scratcher for people because, there's simply not enough to back all these bets that are being made, like bets on whether or not the value of stocks are going to go up and down, and bets on whether or not people are going to pay their mortgages. So something bad kind of has to happen. Somebody is going to be on the winning side of each derivative and someone's going to be on the losing side. So you've got to ask yourself, well, what happens to all the losers of all these positions? Do they just go bankrupt? And that's kind of what this book is about.
Yes. And what happens when one person can't pay another person? So Warren Buffett once said that derivatives are financial weapons of mass destruction, carrying dangers that, while latent, and they have been so far, I mean, we got a taste in 2008 of what derivatives can do, are potentially lethal. And I think that we are this book is about approaching that lethal point. And so I just want to point out real quickly that we are at a peak right now. This is the inflection point right now. The markets are rallying, and what we're seeing is very, very typical of a market peak just before a crash. Recently, there was $35 billion in the last 6 trading days flowing into the S&P 500 ETF, the spiders. Santa Claus rally is an understatement. This has never happened in the history of the spiders, the S&P 500 ETF. It's never been this big in history. And then you look at the fear and greed index, and it's in the extreme greed area, which is where it is always at the very peak of a market just before a crash. Any comments on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're seeing a bunch of things coming together at once, but let's not lose sight of the main idea here, which is that eventually someone's going to lose on each of these bets, right? And so what happens when someone loses on all these derivatives, even if they own the entire stock market and the entire bond market and the entire real estate market, it's not as big as all those derivative positions. So how could that possibly end well?
Well, it can't, and that's what this book is about. It's the derivatives are collateralized or backed by all of the securities that are in the brokerage houses, all the stocks, all the bonds, and all of the mortgage-backed securities. And so I remember several years ago, right after Cyprus did the bail-ins, where they took to any account over $100,000, you got a haircut. You lost a very large percentage of your deposits, and so the banks were legally authorized to just take the depositor's currency and use that to recapitalize the bank and keep the banks solvent. And so anyway, let's dig into this book and look at some of the quotes that I've taken out of this. What is this book about? It's about the taking of collateral, all of it, the end game of this globally synchronous debt accumulation supercycle. And that is what we have been on since the establishment of the Federal Reserve, this synchronous debt accumulation supercycle. Included are all financial assets, all money on deposit at banks, all stocks and bonds, and hence all underlying property of all public corporations, including all inventories, plant and equipment, land, mineral deposits, inventions, and intellectual property. Privately owned personal and real property financed with any amount of debt will be similarly taken, as will the assets of privately owned businesses which have been financed with debt. And so he's making this claim that laws have been, everything has been slowly and almost very, very quietly, almost secretly put in place to where it is this theft that he believes is about to take place has all been legalized, that this is now the law. Any comments on that?
Yeah, exactly. I used to be a portfolio manager about 9 or 10 years ago, and it was a very large portfolio. It was over $1 billion, billion with a B. It was me and another guy. Anyways, very early in the job, he asked me, "How do you know if you actually own something?" This was one of the most important questions he asked me. How do you know if you actually own something? We're managing a lot of money. And I thought about it. I had never considered it before. And I said, well, I guess the law, right? I guess the law will tell you if you own something. And he's like, yeah, basically the law. And that's when I learned about ultimate beneficial ownership. And when you and I, really anybody, when we put our money in the bank, we no longer own it. And the bank does not legally have to give it back to us. And people have a really hard time understanding that. Those laws are on the book.
Right.
And
you're loaning them your currency, and they have a contract with you that they're supposed to repay it, but they get to use that currency for other things. And so, yes, you don't own your deposits at the bank. They are not yours. What you own is an IOU from the bank.
Yeah, and that's if they have enough money to repay all the people who want money,
right,
or currency.
What this book shows is that everything on your brokerage platform, it's the same story. Those are just, when you see that you've got so many shares of this stock and you believe that you own that, what you own are IOUs for shares of that stock from your brokerage house. That all of that stock, all of the shares have been taken, and then they've been transferred to one entity that's a clearinghouse and it's all pooled. So your name is no longer on those shares. This is just pooled. And then it goes into an international clearinghouse. And you'll see with these quotes that the reason for a lot of this is to give them better insight into all of the collateral that they can then take and use in a crisis to keep from going under. Anyway, money is an extremely efficient control system. He's talking about currency. People order themselves upon money incentives. So people do things upon money incentives. And thus, difficult, dangerous, and energy-intensive overt physical control need not be employed broadly. So this is about controlling society. But the money control system breaks down at the end of a monetary supercycle with the collapse in velocity of money. This is a multi-decade process. And you've come up with some charts that we're going to go over in another video that's separate from this, because this video is already going to be long and intense, and we have to sort of separate that. But velocity of money has been collapsing, especially since the COVID crisis. And this is one of the things that he is seeing as the alarm bells. In the next global financial panic, what are the chances that there will be much of anything remaining in these pools of securities after the secured creditors have helped themselves? There will be a game of musical chairs. When the music stops, you will not have a seat, and it is designed to work that way. So what did you get from reading the book when you were when you came across all of this?
Yeah, well, exactly. So you got to remember that, like, at the end of the day, like, the true economy is actually producing things. You can't just like create pieces of paper that like extract wealth from one place and move it somewhere else. There's no value add to that. So if you're running a printing press, you can't print prosperity. So all you can do is funnel wealth, through financial engineering from one place to another. And so if there's the working class that's actually producing, and then there's the financial engineering class that's just extracting wealth, it can only go in one direction. And that's like the basic thing. And this book, The Great Taking, is about not just leaking it slowly over time, but finally moving the entire pile from one group to the other.
Right. And it's done so through debt. So you have to grow debt and get everybody into debt to be able to do this. Back, I think it was back in the 70s, my father was doing some import export, and he was on this, he was a liaison and on this delegation to Japan. And somebody in Japan told him, in Japan, we build things. In the United States, you guys play with money. And we've got this financialization of the entire global economy, and it keeps on getting more and more and more complex, and thus more fragile. And it's all voodoo at this point. It is, the deeper you dive into the way the global economy works, the more you realize that it is all just a bunch of voodoo. So moving on. Now, anything in italics is not David Webb's writing. These are quotes that he has taken from some law or regulation or a court case or a conversation between the Fed and the European Central Bank, things like that. So you're going to have to download the book. It's free, and read it. There is also a video on it that's much easier. It's not quite as in-depth, and you really should take it. I mean, it's like, if you want to survive what is coming, if he is right, you need to read this and see whether or not you think it's true and whether or not you need to take some action. In the unlikely event of a shortfall of securities, the client in question, that's you if you own stocks, bonds, or mortgage-backed securities or any other type of security, will not be able to claim a right of separation, but will likely be considered as an unsecured creditor without priority to the assets of the bankruptcy estate. So that's basically the same as your deposits at the bank. And that is the reason, the FDIC, for banks, there's the FDIC insurance, so that your deposits supposedly aren't at risk, but there isn't enough insurance available to cover all of this if it's massive. In times of market stress, rapid deployment of available securities, so they're talking about the rapid deployment of your securities because they're available because they've been pooled in these clearinghouses, may be crucial in mitigating systemic issues. For instance, with better visibility of available securities and better access to them so that they can take them from you, firms may be better positioned to rapidly deploy securities to meet margin needs. So these institutes, just like Lehman, are margined. They're working on leverage. It's dangerous. In fact, some of the leverage is like, the actual equity that these clearinghouses have is like 2%. So to meet margin needs at CCPs, now I have inserted central clearing counterparties. That's what CCPs means. In times of increased market volatility, or to pledge to central banks in emergency situations to gain increased access to the lender of last resort, which means that they're going to take your stock, pledge it to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve creates currency and loans it to, not to you, but to this central clearing counterparty that might be on the verge of bankruptcy, that is holding all of our shares of stock in pooled accounts without our names on them. They're not attached to, and basically that would mean that the brokerage house that you're with has IOUs for stocks from the central clearing counterparty. And then we have IOUs so it's IOUs for IOUs, and all of the real shares of stock are in this pool that can be accessed and used as collateral to back all of these derivatives that these entities have been doing. So the purpose of the safe harbors from their inception has been to promote stability in large and, I bolded this, inherently unstable financial markets. So they're inherently unstable by protecting transactions in those markets from being disturbed during a bankruptcy. And remember, Bear Stearns, Lehman, these were bankruptcies. As explained in the legislative history of the original safe harbor, the financial stability of the clearinghouses would be severely threatened by exposure to avoidance claims, as well as, and then I bolded this, actions to avoid margin payments made by clearinghouses could set off a chain reaction of insolvencies among other market participants, threatening the entire industry. So threatening the entire industry means all stock markets globally falling like dominoes. This would be every brokerage house, every investment bank. This was threatening the entire industry. What he's talking about is something really big. And so they've changed all of the laws so that they can backstop everything by grabbing all of your stocks, bonds, and the collateral, and using that as the collateral to back all of these derivatives. So in this part, he's quoting some of a decision that was made by the courts, and I believe this is after the Lehman Brothers crisis, and so Lehman Brothers triggered these hearings. And here it says that the court agrees with J.P. Morgan Chase that safe harbors apply here, and it is appropriate for these provisions to be enforced as written and applied literally in the interest of market stability. J.P. Morgan Chase, as one of the leading financial institutions in the world, quite obviously is a member of the protected class. And so this lays out these special organizations that are the protected class. And moving on, now remember, whenever it's not italicized, this is David Webb speaking. So only a member of the protected class is empowered to take customer assets in this way. In the aftermath of the 2007-2008 global financial crisis, no executive was convicted of a crime for the use and subsequent loss of client assets. And that's like in Lehman Brothers. They were using client assets and a lot of leverage, and then they went under and people lost. Quite to the contrary, the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers was used to establish case law precedent that the protected class of secured creditors have an absolute priority claim to client assets, and that potentially and practically only they will end up with the assets. Super priority is only for the protected class. The public can only be allowed the appearance of protection. It's a very, very interesting book, and it is notated. So these quotes, he's pieced together all of these pieces of a of a puzzle that could add up to something very, very dangerous. As Warren Buffett said, lethal financially to all of us. Now, he digresses and goes back to how during the Great Depression this happened on a smaller scale than what he is talking about. But the banking collapse and everything, the banks ended up with all of the property. So this thing of deflation and currency velocity falling off of a cliff was used back in the 30s. And so on a small scale, this has already been done. Now, I added this bold type here regarding the gold nationalization of 1933, but then the rest is him. People who were simply protecting themselves and their families from the actions of the Federal Reserve System were accused of hoarding gold and literally criminalized if they persisted in doing so. The rationale is incredible. You are hoarding gold, so we will take it and do what with it? Hoard it. That is exactly what they have done since 1933. They've been sitting on all of the gold that was turned over. All of the US's gold is being sat on and hoarded by the Federal Reserve. If you look at the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, which we're going to do in an upcoming video, you will see that all of the US gold has been loaned to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve has it, and it actually backs the currency in circulation to the tune of 0.4 cents for each dollar that the Federal Reserve has printed. And so the SRBs, and then I added Single Resolution Board, that's what an SRB, 2023 working program is set against a backdrop of great uncertainty. While the start of 2022 saw economies begin to emerge from the pandemic, 2023 will see added challenges. Now, more than ever, it is important we finalize the work on banking resolvability and ensure that all of the goals set out in the I'm dyslexic for everybody out there. If you haven't seen me before, I had to rehearse this a couple of times. So sometimes I have difficulty reading. I'm sorry. To ensure that all of the goals set out in the SRB's expectations for banks, that's the thing they're referring to in this broader thing, are met before the year is out. This was the initial target date, and we are on track to meet it. The year 2023 will be the last of a transitional period for the establishment of the main elements of the resolution framework in the banking union. And then David Webb says here, it seems that we are getting very close to showtime. So the Single Resolution Board, their working program is trying to get this done by the end of this year, just a few weeks from now. This is all going to be in place to be able to do the great taking during the next great financial crisis. So I want to remind everybody of this quote from the great Ludwig von Mises. There is no means of avoiding a final collapse of a boom brought about by credit expansion. The alternative is only whether the crisis should come sooner as a result of voluntary abandonment of further credit expansion, or later as a final and total catastrophe of the currency system involved. And what David Webb is talking about here is big deflation causing this, and it lines up with my first book, and episode 6 of Hidden Secrets of Money is exactly about this, that there would be little inflation followed by deflation, followed by real inflation, which we have now seen. The real inflation came and now followed by a real deflation, a contraction of the currency supply, which we are seeing right now, and the slowing of velocity. And so this is potentially an end game for the currency system involved. And I've been warning about the death of the global dollar standard since I believe it was 2011, 2012. I did a big presentation on it in Singapore, but I've been giving presentations on it since 2009. And it has been slowly evolving. But the thing about these kind of things is they go slow at first and then they suddenly start speeding up. And I think we might be getting closer to that point. If you are wealthy, David says, you might assume that because the system has allowed them to accumulate wealth, they will be protected in some way, that they are special, that you are special. They're just saving you for dessert. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing. But I believe that unless you are among that protected class, that he could be right here. Now, this may or may not be true and correct, but you have to read the book and decide this for yourself, because if he's right, we are in for something big. And then he's got some final comments that a public that can no longer distinguish between truth and fiction is left to interpret reality through illusion. Random facts or obscured bits of data and trivia are used to either bolster illusion or give it credibility, or discarded if they interfere with the message. When opinions cannot be distinguished from facts, when there is no universal standard to determine truth in law, in science, in scholarship, or in reporting the events of the day, when the most valued skill is the ability to entertain, the world becomes a place where lies become true, where people can believe what they want to believe. Globally, we have witnessed overt media control and propaganda campaigns, censorship, including arrests of people speaking in public, and monitoring of all electronic communications. Governments dropped all pretense of democracy and were emboldened to practice open despotism. There were no functioning checks on this power. The courts provided no effective recourse to the public. Government broadly abused fundamental human rights. And so I want to, this is actually a misquote. It's just this first paragraph, and it's attributed to Thomas Jefferson. I have no idea who made this up, but it is actually appropriate in this case. If the American people ever allow private banks, which includes the central banks, to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, which we have already seen, then by deflation, which I predicted in my book and episode 6 of Hidden Secrets of Money, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. So this is the great taking everything. And so we've got a little meme here. It's a hedge fund specializing in highly complex derivatives and exotic financial instruments for discriminating investors. And he's saying, buy gold. Got any comments on that, Alan?
Buy gold. I already got it. I know some very wealthy people, including fund managers, who only own digital things. No gold, no real property. They could potentially go to zero, like literally zero. Everything could be taken.
The whole thing, the whole financial system, the monetary system is all a bunch of very bizarre voodoo. It's just a bunch of voodoo. It doesn't really exist. It's a fugazi.
It's a fugazi.
So I urge everybody to go and download The Great Taking. There is also a video available that you can watch that's condensed like this. And then also, I never make recommendations. What I do is I tell people what I am doing. And, I intend this week to try and take delivery of some of my stock certificates that I want to keep. The rest of it I'm going to sell. But I actually this book worries me enough to take more action. And then I'm going to be buying some more gold. So anything you want to say in closing, Alan?
Well, I also can't give anyone advice, but I can tell them what I'm doing. And I have a couple ounces here, mostly for props on videos. And the rest of what I have is not here. And I got rid of all my stocks and bonds. I sold out of both my IRAs a couple years ago when I saw these things happening. and I took a massive penalty, 30% or 40%, just to exit those positions. But I'd rather lose 30 or 40% than 100%. So that's what I chose to do. I know it's very drastic. I'm not recommending that anyone does it, but that's what I did. And I own in my own possession every single thing I've ever worked for. Nothing is digital. Nothing can be taken by a government, a bank, or corporation. It's all in my hands.
Wow. Yes. That's what I'm doing more of. And even though the dollar is a fiat currency that is going through inflation and a loss of purchasing power every single month, for me, I thought it prudent to have some cash on hand that I can get to in an emergency, because this book is talking about an extreme crisis. And if you've watched some of my recent videos and read the book, the scale of the bubbles that they have created since 2008 is just absolutely enormous. And when this unravels, this should be the thing that causes all these derivatives to start cascading as falling dominoes, and thus the big brokerage houses that have the legal authority now to grab all of your assets and use them, and the banks to be able to grab property that you have loans on, because in a deflation, the value of the property falls below the value of the loan. You can't sell it to get out of debt. You're really stuck. So I would urge people to read that book, and you may want to pick up a copy of my book as well, just so you can see where we are actually at today. And the main thing is comparing this to what happened in the precious metals bull market of the 70s, because you may come out, even though the world comes out much worse for this financial crisis that is coming at us, you may personally come out better off. So anything else, Alan?
No, that's it. I would just encourage people to prepare, educate themselves. It's better to be 5 years too early than 5 minutes too late.
Exactly. So I want to thank everybody for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and smash that thumbs up and the notification bell. And we will see you all next time. Thanks for watching.